Hello, good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning, or good whatever time of night or day it happens to be, wherever you happen to be. Um, I'm going to be talking about the Gamergate factions again tonight in this video. I'm going to call it, I guess, Gamergate Factions Revisited. And so I did discuss factions from some other perspectives in a previous video. I guess it was a couple of videos ago now. My 9th video. And I will link that in the description to this video. I also would like to, before I get started talking about another person's take on what he sees um, as the different factions or cliques or whatever within Gamergate, I would like to issue a public apology to one of the people who was a source for the information I presented in that previous Gamergate factions video. Now, I've already apologized to him on Twitter, and he said it was no big deal. He's gone by various names in the past. But in my video, my previous video, I referred to him consistently as Barfu, Barfu Gaming, and his name is actually Barlu Gaming with an L. So maybe I need to get new glasses or something. But anyway, so his name is actually Barlu Gaming, but he said it was not a big deal because he has gone by the name Barbu Gaming in the past, Bearded Gaming. And yeah, that has a very obvious Latin root from Barbatus, which means bearded one. So anyway, tonight I want to address the subject again of different factions or cliques or whatever you want to call them within the wider Gamergate movement. And again, there are people who will disagree with Gamergate being referred to as a movement, and I understand the reasons, but the fact of the matter is, as QQ said, among the things that I related to you in my previous video about Gamergate factions, what it should be and what it is are two different things. So yeah, I think it's safe and fair to refer to a movement known as Gamergate, made up of people called Gamergaters. Now you can see here in this art that I've put up at the moment, there is a Lillian Woods sitting on the far left there with her blonde hair. Vivian James is sitting there with her red hair and the purple and green hoodie that is so associated with her. It looks to me like, and I can't really see it entirely clearly, but it looks like she has the 8chan headband on, whereas Lillian is still wearing the 4chan headband. And coming in the door are 3 supposed clones of Vivian. Now, I don't know that the one in the I think that's Erica Polina, the one with the blonde braided hair, and I don't really know that she should be regarded as a clone of Vivian. I'm not sure who the one with the orange and yellow is. Has what looks like the letter psi from Greek alphabet on a hat that she's wearing, or perhaps that's perhaps it's a headband also. And then there's another one coming in the door with orange and red. I mean orange and blue. Sorry, some kind of orange and blue top on. It looks like maybe a frog's head or something. And Vivian is reacting to these people coming in and saying, "Okay, what the hell? How many of me are there out there?" Now, what I wanted to do, and I looked for it on Google, and I looked for it at the 5 different albums that are of Vivian that are linked on Kotaku in Action, and I looked at the whole album of Vivian James on Know Your Meme. I asked several people, and I didn't get anyone or find it myself. Didn't get anyone who knew where it was or had a copy of it. So I mean, I asked Netscape, and he was still not online at the time, and he would probably know what I'm talking about and have a copy of it or a link to it somewhere. But the image that I was wanting to use has a character who's obviously supposed to be based on Agent Smith from The Matrix. And he says, the thing that I like about you, and I may not be getting the words from the caption exactly right, but he says something like, the thing that I like about you, Miss James, is that there are so many of you, and there are, in the picture or the second panel or whatever it is, a number of different people's takes on Vivian James and what she looks like and so forth. So, well, I looked for that and I couldn't find it. But the idea was, you know, there are a number of different views about what Gamergate is, and there are a number of different conceptions of who Vivian is, what she looks like, and so forth. I mean, you have some here with she's got glasses. You've got some here where she has brown hair, somewhere she has red hair, somewhere she has auburn hair, somewhere she has black hair. And there are, you know, this is just a small sample. I've seen several other, several other images of Vivian. And there's even one that is based on the original final draft of the original Vivian, which is exactly the same except she has black hair instead of red hair, which was done after, and someone just kind of blackened her hair instead of leaving it the kind of orangey red color that it is generally. So anyway, now in my previous video on the subject of Gamergate, I started it off talking with the QQ, who goes by the handle Púca in various contexts, Twitter and Discord and so forth. So in Irish mythology and Scottish mythology, which I know rather well, the Púca is a nature spirit of sorts, what would be called a spirit of nature in Gaelic, or a spirit of elements or something, who takes different forms, and sometimes he'll take the form of a goat, sometimes a horse, sometimes a bull, sometimes a great giant eagle, and carry people on his back. And if he comes anywhere near water, you're in for quite a shock, because he will rush into the water and splash the rider in the water. And in some other stories, which are probably related, the Wishka, the water horse, will take people into the water and drown them. And the Púca is not exactly the same as that entity. But in this particular video, I'm going to be talking again about the various factions or cliques or whatever, the various takes on what Gamergate is and so forth. And again, I will be referring to things that I have discussed with the Púca. We had another conversation now on the the second. And so in the course of that discussion, he said to me that he has his own take on on the different, let's see here. Now, I had all this lined up, and then I discovered that I didn't have all the images I wanted prepared for my videos. So, now I have to find it again. So this was an even longer, I think, conversation than our previous conversation. So, oh, here we are. Okay, so he says, as for the factions, I have my idea of what they were, and I said, I'd like to hear or read your take on that. And he says, okay, my colloquial names for them were the V click, then that's /V/, which refers to the V or video games board on 4chan, and I guess later 8chan. So he lists them as the V-Click, the industry shills, the new establishment in journalism, the new establishment in indie, the outcasts, the PR crew. Sorry, the PR crew. Okay. So, I'm having 100% blue agave tequila tonight, mixed with Pepsi. So, this is going to be a tequila-infused video, I guess. So then he begins to describe his different groups that he's talking about here, what he calls cliques. He says the V clique was basically centered around the V board, but they had direct message groups and discords. It was basically a group of gaming buddies who all came together over the controversy. People like, and he gives me a list of names here. Some of the names look familiar to me. Some of them I know or have seen, like on Twitter and so forth, and I see tweets from them occasionally. And he gives these names, and he says Doomscander, Lapito the Clown, Ethics the Kid slash Bebopanopolis, Queen Jinx slash Shartok, Marsh or Marcha, Mountain Sage, WCS slash Sun King, Low Ping, Maximus Honkmus, I think that's Maximus Honkamus, actually. Place de Bastille, D1966MR, Nahalenia, Ash Night Zero, Sleeping Season, and so on. This is a vague list, may have false positives and people missing. But yeah, the V-Click had a very specific canon of what Gamergate was and was not, and worked with the other cliques who pushed that canon forward. They also kind of thought of themselves as in charge of the image board side of things, and when the Gamergate board died, they took charge in finding the replacement and excluded another clique, the Old Guard, from being in the selection process. I respond, I don't recognize any of those names except maybe Doomscander, Queen Jinx, Maximus Honkamus, and Loping I do see on Twitter. He continues and says, they moved in packs in 2015/2016. I hated the V-Clique because they viewed me as hanging out with the Old Guard and spreading their memes, so they would actively oppose me on Twitter. And I ask, and the Old Guard is who? I know that's a term used in politics since the 80s to refer to what are sometimes called paleo-conservatives, but I don't think that's what you mean. And he says, burgers and fries and DDM, I would say, are the Old Guard. And now burgers and fries, by that he means the IRC channel. And I asked, well, where did they come from originally? V, Pol? And he says, the original history of burgers and fries is very well captured. This was when 4chan was being censored. Entire threads were being nuked in August 2014. Both 4V and 4Pol decided they could organize better on IRC, so Cyberzerker created Burgers and Fries on Ryzon. Some of their early ops were planning hit and runs on 4V and 4Pol, trying to info dump and recruit more people to IRC by coordinated bumping, trying to get an info dump in front of as many eyes as possible before mods deleted it. And I asked, so they're still on IRC? Geez, I thought everyone left IRC for Yahoo Messenger and then Skype and now Discord. And he said, yeah, the IRC still exists too. I hang out there and chat every week. And I observed that Skype is like a ghost town now, in my experience. And then I said, well, I guess that makes sense. I guess there are still active Usenet news groups too. You know, the ancient internet Usenet news groups are still around. So he says the industry shills were centered around the Filthy Tavern, now defunct, and the GGNSF meetups, Gamergate in San Francisco meetups. They consist of Cult of Vivian, Nonsensical, he has Cult of Vivian / Nonsensical, Roguestar / Slade Valena, Red Morgan / Dread Morgan, Doomscander, Shallart, the Ivy Clover 1, Basileos Alexios, the Devil's Advocate / MCT1, Forever Player 2, Son of a Cad, Ben Dalton, Knucklebull, and Scrump Monkey, and so on. Again, maybe some false positives, maybe some people missing. Actually, the most I can give is small subsets due to how complicated social media signal boosting is. They were formed inorganically, actually, and Scrump Monkey ended up having a falling out with them. And then when the Filthy Tavern, a TeamSpeak, collapsed in mysterious circumstances I have yet to get a straight answer over, a bunch of the group became less cancerous. But Ben Dalton and someone from Super Nerdland constructed Cult of Vivian. They found a young girl, Nicole, who looked somewhat like Vivian James and decided to turn her into a living mascot. Slade got involved because of the allegations of corruption at the IGF, IGDA, various indie festivals and competitions. So I say, I know who Cult of Vivian is, but I think she's moved on now to other things, doesn't even keep the account by that name active. This one guy, I think I might have known in a game some years ago, Roguestar, if he's the same person who also went sometimes by this other name, which I'm not going to mention here. Doomscander, again, it sounds familiar, so does Basileus Alexios, and I see Scrump Monkey on Twitter. Then he continues, so this group and I also got along horribly, mostly because I'd push initiatives like Boycott Battlefront. And that clique was almost entirely focused on making peace with AAA publishers, which I thought was an incredible mistake. Businesses are in it for the money. You cannot align their interest with yours as long as there are financial incentives not to do so. That and most of AAA right now is fucking evil and anti-consumer, almost worse than the journalists who cover them and who fail to hold them to account. So I observed, well, it depends on who's running the businesses. Most publishers, yes, but not all. The issue with publishers and the anti-consumerism which characterizes most of them is that they have dumbasses with MBAs running the show, and those guys and gals only think of maximum immediate profit, not sustaining a customer base or long-term profit. And QQ says, bingo. Then he goes on and still talking about the industry shills clique, as he calls them. He says, the easiest way to explain this clique's behavior is, and I only have a little proof of this, that they had an industry shill actively planted among them who was trying to whisper sweet nothings to them, that everything was going to be all right, that Gamergate was going to win, that most AAA publishers supported them, but first they needed to lay off being mean at all to publishers and developers, and second, they needed to clean up Gamergate's image and kick out the bad trolls. Now, I have some suspicions about there actually existing such a plant, but I can't prove they were a plant. And I observed, well, the cake was a lie, you know. And then he goes on, but it doesn't matter because that is how they acted, and it ran right up against me and what I was trying to accomplish. My video titled Your Power as a Consumer was intended as a hard counter to this clique. Now, I'm going to put a link to his video, Your Power as a Consumer, in the description for this video. And then he goes on, now the tavern collapsed. A lot of them came to their senses. I get along with Basileos Alexios and Scrump okay. Dread Morgan, the owner of the Filthy Tavern, vanished completely once the Gawker verdict was handed down. Slade still blocks me, as does Nicole, and their immediate buddies still hate me. And he smiles. And I say, well, like I said, the Cult of Vivian account is dead now. No posts in some time. She has a new account, and I guess keeps that one for an archive, although there isn't much there that I've seen. Now, and I know there are two different accounts, so I think the one that I'm talking about is the one on Facebook, and there is another one on Twitter, and I haven't actually looked at that one to see if it's active or not. So then he goes on and he talks about the new establishment in journalism clique was the guys who thought they could set up the new sites to replace the existing crap. Most of them were okay. Some ended up being independent from the clique, but a particularly nasty strain, um, the one I actually consider to be clique-like, centered around the open house streaming community, Robin Gething and Shrek Bain. The open house still exists, but it has an entirely different population now with only Gething in common. So I didn't like them at all either, and they didn't like me. Part of the reason was Schreckbane ran Lewd Gamer, and I knew a few ex-Lewd Gamer writers who left on not so great terms, or ex-staff for Schreckbane's other sites. But one of the things that they ran active damage control on was they wanted us to have double standards to forgive pro-Gamergate sites for certain behaviors we would view as unforgivable if Kotaku did it. I did not stand for that. The new establishment in Indy actually ended up being pretty harmless. It was bad at first when they were all centered around Slade, but once Slade alienated them all, it wasn't so bad. The outcasts, that was me. I wasn't old school enough to be part of the old guard, but I still hung out with them. The PR crew was a loose coalition of people from all of these groups. One thing you may notice that is common is all of these cliques viewed Gamergate as some cohesive movement and one that they had more of a claim to membership of than any other clique, and they also had in common the idea that optics were important for them to accomplish their goals. So they were the ones flooding my mentions if I did something that went against their optics within the hashtag, like asking to boycott EA or boycott Nintendo Treehouse, or my usual level of humor. There were a few more cliques too, but they were really simple. Ralph's clique, people who hung out with or liked the Ralph retort and the people behind it. And I observed there were those in the harassment patrol who wanted him out. He says, I got along fine with them, but they had a massive falling out with the industry shill clique over Lily Feng's suicide, which culminated with many of the industry shill clique quitting in what seemed to be a coordinated fashion at the end of 2015. Because Gamergate's reputation had become unsalvageable in their mind. I'd say your faction breakdown doesn't really work because all these groups would do absolutely horrendous stuff to each other as long as they thought they could get away with it. It doesn't cleanly break down into these people were the good guys and these were the harassers. And I said, well, it's not mine so much as a couple of other people's, and then the anti-Gamergate author of the article at Slate. I don't really have a view on the factions. I can see some differences of approach. I'm inclined to put the people from 4chan V in one and the people from Pol in another. There were also Something Awful or SA Goon Swarm types who posed as Gamergaters. Then there were Gamergate Revolt and what might be called mainstream Gamergate as the moderates, as the Slate writer called them. But as far as a rundown, I don't have one of my own because I've only recently begun to explore what other people have to say on the subject of factions in Gamergate. I would like to get several people's takes on the idea, and then we'll probably form my own view. Then he says, as for the SA, the Something Awful clique, oh boy, do they have a history. And I said, and yeah, I've had run-ins with the Goon Swarm here and there in games, in gaming forum sites and so forth. He says, you know how I keep saying the internet has an oral tradition when it comes to history? And I'm still talking about the Goon Swarm, and I say a lot of them pretend to be very concerned about pedophilia. And he says, I can get you the Anon oral tradition of goons. Oral here being an image board post, so not really oral in the traditional sense. And I say, right, that could prove interesting and possibly useful. So then he gives me this image, and he says the image was terrible. I had to run it through some program to clean up all the JPEG artifacting. Um, I'm going to pause reading from this discussion with him for the moment to show you some of the images that I got from him about this. And now, he gave me one big image, and I had to cut it down a little bit, select bits of it to post here in the hope that you'll be able to read them. I think the first one may still be a bit too small as far as the letters go. So I will go ahead and read it to you. Now, this apparently comes from one of the Chan boards. I don't know if this is 4chan or 8chan. It might even be from Reddit, but it doesn't really look like Reddit stuff to me. It looks more like one of the Chan boards. And I don't frequent the Chan boards. I never have. I've gone there only when someone would call something to my attention. So okay, the first thing is from the 24th of February in 2013. So this is before Gamergate exploded in August of 2014. And this is from some anonymous person on one of the Chan boards. And he or she says, he's seen some pretty horrific shit, and I consider myself damn lucky that he's chosen to share some of his stories with me. I won't talk too much about it, but he served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Blah, blah, blah. I'll be honest, before he came into my life, I was pretty strongly into the social justice crowd. Looking back, that whole thing operates a lot like a cult. It lures in vulnerable people, especially young people, people who are going through puberty and trying to figure out their sexuality, people who might be dealing with disability or mental illness, or whose family is breaking up. It sucks them in by spoon-feeding the idea that they are special and worthy. It guilts them if they don't treat everybody else as special and worthy too. It starts forcing you to see everybody as being in a hierarchy. And continues in the next post. Then it gets you to alienate yourself from your friends. Your friend sometimes makes racist or sexist jokes. Cut her out of your life. Got any conservative friends? Cut them out of your life. Got any friends who are white straight men? Cut them out of your life. They're the oppressors. Constantly berate people if they slip up, because everybody else must be held to the same standards that you are, and no other ways of thinking are right. And the right is there in scare quotes. Then it tells you to start criticizing and trying to change your family. It tells you to call out any little thing they do wrong. It warps your perception until you are a victim and constantly on the defense. It breaks you off from everybody and makes you feel awful for things you cannot control. And then, if you disagree or start questioning, it cuts you off from the only support you have left, and you are attacked and viciously berated. Maybe if you grovel enough, they'll let you be redeemed and come back, but you will never be allowed to forget the one mistake you made. Eventually, I found anti-social justice blogs, where people were actively critiquing these concepts and the social justice culture. Originally, I felt nothing but hatred for them, but then the words started to sink in. I started questioning whether this was really right, whether this really was right. I saw how so many people leading the crowd were hugely hypocritical. I realized that I had been causing the problems in my life, not oppression. I apologized to my family for how I'd been acting, and I'm lucky that they were still supportive of me. I'd lost a lot of friends, including some people I was very close to. It's taken me a long time to rebuild those relationships. It was a very bad period of my life, and one that took a lot of effort to drag myself away from. The social justice Tumblr crowd is completely toxic, and I feel very sorry for everybody who's sucked into it. It is nothing but hatred and guilt, and I have no respect for the people who perpetrate it. And then another person comes in on the same date and says, another anon here. This is basically the cycle of abuse, but it's being reinforced collectively. Find someone vulnerable, jump on them, pull them in by giving them something they want or need, use this as leverage to assert further control. Then once you've assumed total control or possibly even direct control, they will begin to withhold what they originally offered you until you obey. Often this behavior will escalate out of control, wherein minor offenses are met with outrageous punishments. I want you all to learn how to recognize this pattern because there are plenty of people who will attempt to use it on you, possibly without thinking. This shit destroys lives, and if you've never seen it before, you probably don't think anything is wrong. Okay, so the next image that I pulled out of that was this, and I'm not sure exactly where this comes from, but it looks also to be from one of the Chan boards. And it says SRS, which is shit Reddit says, is an internet group on Reddit, Reddit, currently word filtered at this board apparently. SRS is an internet group on Reddit called Shit Reddit Says. Their stated purpose is to highlight examples of bigotry on Reddit. The truth is more interesting. 1. In 2007, Anonymous raided a website called Women's Space. A feminist on the site called Biting Beaver had found her young teenage son masturbating, and according to her feminist ideology, this made him a rapist who deserved to die. Anons, being mostly male teenage chronic masturbators, found this unacceptable, and a small online war broke out against her, the website, and pretty much every feminist blogger online. Biting Beaver. And this had an unforeseen consequence, though. Some of these feminists were impressed by Anon's show of strength and decided to hang around. They migrated to the Something Awful forums and became a goon clique. Then we have this person called Mr. Skeleton. And this one, I have a date for the 1st of March 2013. Still, again, before Gamergate exploded into a thing. And this person says, Something Awful is now mostly known for their EVE gaming clan, and gives a link there that is some kind of an article from PC Gamer. Nowhere is safe in EVE Online as goon swarm suicide bombs galactic trade hub. But they used to be a real force. Many of the most impressive stunts performed by Anonymous were actually perpetrated by goons. Goons had a much smaller user base, but they were more technically minded. They organized on the IRC networks and used the vast swarm of B-tards as shock troops. When they found Reddit, they initially intended to do a similar thing, and insider goons claim that they intended Shit Reddit Says to be a way of griefing Reddit users. This didn't work, but this didn't work out the way they expected, because the majority of the goons who were convinced to join the new SRS group were the feminist goon hybrids created in the Biting Beaver raids. A few of the early members just used left-wing rhetoric to annoy ordinary Reddit users, but the number of Shit Reddit Says members who actually believed it outnumbered the trolls. And then this person, Mr. Skeleton, continues in another post, a subsequent post, same date, and says, the new Reddit group established a name for itself by trolling people in a peculiar way. They would harass and attack ordinary users, but then claim they had the moral high ground because they were bullying the bullies. They do this by using, and so I'm gonna, I don't believe in this cultural Marxism shit. This is a conspiracy theory, but at any rate, he says, they do this by using cultural Marxist arguments. They claim that prejudice is bigotry plus power, and we have definitely seen this from certain people, namely Anita Sarkeesian. They claim that prejudice is bigotry plus power and define power as being a straight white male. I don't know about that, but anyway. So even though what they are doing seems to be exactly the same as the bigots they say they hate, it's okay because they are doing it they are doing it to straight people, whites and males. And then there's a link to uh, some I guess it's a board on Reddit, or used to be, maybe at the time of this post, which was SRS sucks. And then he continues, when forced into a corner, they also fall back on the argument of satire. They claim they are just trolling and not attempting to be serious at all. It's just a light-hearted practical joke. Reddit users come from a different demographic than 4chan users, and thus this was their first experience at trolling. A lot of them wanted to join in, and SRS snowballed in a big way. So I'm going to move on to the next image that I pulled from the large image collage. And this is the same guy again, Mr. Skeleton, also on the same date, continues a new post. And it has a picture of what isn't, the name of the file is A Legendary Trap. And he says then, should Reddit says versus Reddit Rainbow, the subreddit Rainbow. Reddit has a large population of traps and gay fags, as he calls them. Most of these actively oppose Shit Reddit Says. This is because Shit Reddit Says managed to gain control of the LGBT Reddit subforum. The way Reddit is set up means the mods have a great deal of power. They can ban users for no reason, delete posts, and change forum rules. Shit Reddit Says used this power to enforce their ideology, which included a privilege pyramid of oppressed groups and a list of acceptable language. Anyone who disagreed was attacked for being tools of the patriarchy, leading to the fucked up situation of straight Shit Reddit Says members accusing gay fags of being homophobic misogynists and banning them from their own forum. Most traps and gay fags left and set up a new forum called R Rainbow. This now has 19,876 members. The next image that I pulled from the image collage, also same date, same poster, Mr. Skeleton. It says, Shit Reddit Says versus Male Rights Activists, or MRAs. MRAs are a loose collection of people dedicated to gender equality. Unsurprisingly, feminists and Shit Reddit Says hate them. The central concept of MRA is that society is not equal, and in some areas, genital mutilation, education, health, reproductive rights, legal rights, social protection, men suffer a disadvantage. This threatens feminism on two grounds. First, because every step towards equality MRAs take is a privilege women lose. More importantly, because it threatens the feminist worldview that women are second-class citizens in a patriarchy. In feminism, any situation where women have advantage over men is actually a sign of how women are the victims of benevolent sexism. Shit Reddit Says set up a Reddit subgroup called Against Men's Rights and proceeded to attack MRAs from there. It also began to dox MRA websites outside Reddit. The big attack came from an unexpected angle, a group called the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC. This is an old-school civil rights organization which is used as an information source by law enforcement and the media. The SPLC declared the male rights movement to be a hate group. Basically, wanting equal rights puts you at the same level as a KKK member. Shit Reddit Says actually managed to convince the SPLC to do this. Unbelievable, yet true. And then gives some kind of a link to some forum thread, which I have not looked at and don't intend to. The SPLC later released a statement saying it was just a warning, but the damage was done. Now, before I go any further with this, I'm going to point out this is someone else's viewpoint and what they're saying about various things. I do not approve of referring to homosexuals as gay fags, for example. And, you know, of course, I understand that there are at least 3 waves of feminism and various perspectives within each wave, or there were. First wave feminism is, of course, a thing in the past, but there was more than one perspective, even in first wave feminism. Second wave feminism, I've discussed, I think, before in some of these videos and in guest appearances on other people's channel streams. And then the third wave, so-called feminists, have, well, I don't know how many different perspectives they have. They seem to be rather authoritarian and not very tolerant of dissent, so I don't know if they have more than one perspective. But anyway, I don't necessarily agree with his take on feminism, this Mr. Skeleton a person's take on feminism, except, you know, I think he's probably talking about the so-called third wave feminism, in which case he may be right. So moving on then, his next post, also on the same day, he gives a an image of a skull here. A skull, no suit, fuel, undressed. And then he says, shit Reddit says is lulz sec. Lulz Security were and or are a hacking group who became big in 2011. They were mostly griefers who enjoyed fucking with corporate websites, but also indulged in some hacktivism supporting WikiLeaks. A shitreddit says member called Lorelei managed to work herself into the group. I'm using the gender pronoun she because it's polite. Okay, whatever. Once there, Lorelei demanded that lulzsec start attacking shitreddit's own enemy list. When lulzsec refused, she tried to blackmail them, and when that didn't work, Lorelei told the FBI who they were and handed the feds lulzsec's chat logs as evidence. He continues, next post, same date. Shitreddit says versus Occupy Wall Street, or OWS. OWS was a protest against corruption in the financial industry and income wealth inequality, or at least it started out that way. When the Occupy Wall Street movement was starting up, SRS managed to gain control of the social media sites which the protesters used to organize. The control of these allowed SRS to push their own ideology into the movement and ultimately destroy it. One of the things they introduced was the progressive stack. This is an organizational tool which discriminates against white straight men in favor of the people on the SRS privilege pyramid. And he gives a link to a Wikipedia article, which I'll show you here in a moment. SRS's attempts to control OWS and change it from an economic protest into an SRS-style social justice movement made organization impossible, as any attempt to create coherent goals or leadership was oppression. The lack of leadership combined with the active discrimination against men meant that OWS disintegrated. And then the next post, and I'm not sure if this is from the same person or not, but I think it might be. Whoever it is says SRS versus Poll, which is politically incorrect board on 4chan. Poll is SRS's largest target. SRS is attempting to gain moderator status on Poll. They think getting this will give them a platform to spread their ideology to the 4chan user base and enhance their reputation online. SRS has been shitposting on all boards across 4chan since December 2012. They then use these threads created by their sock puppets as evidence on Q. Q was set up to discuss 4chan itself and offer constructive criticism. If you go to Q now, you will find at least half the threads are dedicated to modding or deleting Poll. They hope their actions will force Moot to appoint them as mods or delete the board entirely and set up a new one which they could become mods on. Okay, and so then the next post is by Anonymous, so I'm not sure if that's the same person or not. And it says, more Reddit history. SRS had their largest victory in taking down subreddit creep shots, a subreddit wherein people would post usually lewd pictures of women they took supposedly without the knowledge of the women. Generally, the Reddit higher-ups didn't give a flying fuck about the content of your subreddit, but seeing as SRS has slept their way to the top of most mod lists on the site, they were able to get creep shots pulled. Now again, this is the view of people that I'm reading their posts. I don't know anything about. I'm very new to Reddit, and I have no idea what is going on there. But I have been told that some of this at least sounds plausible by people who are more familiar with Reddit than I am. And then it continues. There were several people upset that not only could Reddit just delete entire communities when there's no proof of wrongdoing, but also with SRS leading a campaign to dox the people running the subreddits they don't like. It was a successful dox in the Creepshots scenario. SRS has gone on to label these people as MRAs in an attempt to make MRA a dirty word. So, and then the final image that I pulled from the image collage, and there are a couple of others in there, but I didn't choose to. I mean, I knew this video was going to be long enough already, and so I didn't want to go through everything there, but there were only a couple more. So as someone had asked, didn't SRS also gain control of subreddit communism? And Mr. Skeleton replied and said, they controlled the LGBT, feminism, and anti-racism Reddits. It's nicknamed the Fempire. They also have a large influence in the anarchism Reddit. Someone else asks, where is this stuff for us all to see? And he replies, check out Reddit LGBT board for more info. I'll try and get screenshots of the specifics when I have time. And someone else says, this is some brilliant work, Skelly. And he replies, thanks. It would be helpful if other Anons also post any information they have about SRS. Okay, and so as promised, here is a screen capture of the Wikipedia article on the progressive stack. A progressive stack is a technique designed to ensure that people from marginalized groups. A progressive stack is a technique designed to ensure that people from marginalized groups get a greater chance to speak. It is sometimes an introduction to, or a stepping stone to, consensus decision-making in which simple majorities have less power. The theory behind the progressive stack is to counteract the notion that people who are part of the majority or dominant culture are generally encouraged to express themselves, while people from minority or non-dominant groups are mostly silenced or ignored. In practice, majority culture is typically interpreted by progressive stack practitioners to mean white or male or young adult, while non-dominant groups include women, people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, people of color, and very young or older people. The stack in the Occupy movement is the list of speakers who are commenting on proposals or asking questions in public meetings. Anyone can request to be added to the stack. In meetings that don't use the progressive stack, people speak in the order they were added to the queue. In meetings that use the progressive stack, people from non-dominant groups are sometimes allowed to speak before people from dominant groups by facilitators or stack keepers, urging speakers to step forward or step back based on which racial, age, or gender group they belong to. The progressive stack concept is controversial inside the Occupy movement. It was adopted for Occupy Wall Street, but not for all Occupy locations. A. Barton Hinkle, a columnist for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, has expressed the opinion that, quote, lining up speakers by race and gender might not seem fair on an individual level, end quote. The progressive stack is a form of priority queue. Now that's all a very interesting information there, which came to me secondhand from the QQ. I'm not really sure if there's more here of which. Oh yes. So I asked him after I looked at that image. I'm also curious about what you've referred to several times as, quote, what I was trying to do, end quote, or, quote, what I was trying to accomplish, end quote. What were you trying to do or accomplish exactly? And his response, the death of the hype machine, saving Vidya, give our children a healthy environment to be raised in. And I ask, healthy environment meaning what? And he says, the education system as applied to the next generation containing as little brainwashing and propaganda as possible. Then I observe, that's a tall order. Everyone has an ideology, and that's going to filter over into their work. You can see it in science fiction and fantasy novels and stories and movies and series, for example, in music, lyrics, in almost any kind of creative endeavor. And he says, correct, but there is a very specific strain I want to keep out. The V clique hated when you pointed this out, but loads of anti-Gamergate linked people wanted to be educators, and they largely got their way too, sadly. Even, and he gives a name, is going into being a lecturer. I point this infiltration out at every opportunity in my videos, and it doesn't seem to make it through to people. About your Brad Glasgow discussion on the roles, yes, very yes. Here is a thing, I keep hearing this from people, but I have no concrete proof. But I have heard from enough people that it has worked its way into the legend. And this is how Gamergate worked in 2014. Image boards were think tanks. This is where all the digging was done. They also built narratives in a shotgun style. You would throw shit at the wall and see what stuck and what didn't. IRC was the curator. They would go over what was taking place in the image boards and pluck only the finest dig results and narratives, the most refined and compelling ones. They had some kind of PR wire to the e-celebs at the time where they would send it out to them so they could incorporate these already well-polished narratives into their work. And then finally, it would end up on Kotaku in Action as the public face. But that structure broke down and you ended up with the e-celebs stuck in a holding pattern where they just reused the same narratives over and over. That's how I got stuck on ethics in games journalism for so long, in my opinion. And I asked them, the very specific strain of which you spoke, is it SJWism, authoritarianism, what? And he says, that's the question. That's the tough question. What is SJWism? The person to write one of the first books on the topic, Will Shetterly, defined it as identitarian neoliberalism. We can go with that for now, sure, even though I have my own definition. So then I say, well, here's how I explained SJW to a bunch of left libertarians a while back on Google+. It says it was 35 weeks ago, so sometime last year. And I am quoting myself now from an old post, not too old, but, sometime last year on Google+. And I said, it is generally, it being SJW, it is generally used to refer to what some refer to as regressive liberals or regressive leftists, the sort who get triggered by rather insignificant things and embrace authoritarian models of thought such as neo-Puritanism and government-imposed censorship. They have defined anyone who dares to even so much as question them, and certainly anyone who disagrees with them, as chauvinists, sexists, misogynists, and racists, homophobes, transphobes, transmisogynists, even if you're a lesbian trans woman of color, and I'm not kidding, I've seen it happen. They advocate for what they think are safe spaces, but which are actually spaces where they insulate themselves from any exposure to reality with all its warts and all its beauty, and which of course turn into echo chambers. And they will block you in a heartbeat if you challenge them on the internet. Many of those who claim to be third-wave feminists fall into the category of social justice warrior. They care not two shits for social justice, but are all about turning feminism on its head and undoing the liberation for which actual feminists have fought for decades in order to impose their sterile vapidity on society. And so then he goes on and asks, what is the core of their ideology, though? Foucaultian critical theory. And I said, well, that's a question I'm not sure has any answer, because some seem to be doing it for attention more than any sense of faith, if you will. One might be tempted to call those Machiavellians. Some seem to be doing it out of a damaged personality disorder, the so-called self-identified victim. People who have experienced real, or in some cases delusional and imaginary, abuse, and then perpetuate that cycle by becoming abusers themselves. Then you have others who definitely have some creed and are convinced of their own righteousness and the need to evangelize others by force of law if need be. And most of these seem to think that they are some kind of feminists. Others are in a similar boat, but rather than believing themselves to be feminists, claim the label liberal or progressive. And so then I talk about certain personalities and try to fit them into these different groups that I've referred to. And then I say, and then you've got the Antifa and partisan Democrat types who fall into that last category, and I don't think those four are the only categories either. So then we started go into critical theory, and Foucaultian ideals and so forth. And so then it goes on for a little bit longer, but I had to break because I needed to go and read some of the stuff that he had linked me to, and to go to the restroom and the powder room and get some food and some drink and so forth. And so I cut it off there a little bit after this. We talked a little bit longer. He gave me some links. I gave him some links. And so I may come back to this later, but this video is already rather long at this point, and so I'm gonna go ahead and cut it off at this point. Now it's almost an hour long, so let me beam up to my V11 Stormbird and warp out, and I am going to wish you all again, have fun, but stay safe and beda. All right, so until next time.